My name is Liora Hanley, and at 72, I have learned to live small but steady. I keep my garden neat, pay every bill on time, and write reminders on pale yellow sticky notes so I never owe anyone an apology. After 40 years of teaching art at Savannah High, I retired with enough to keep my independence. I do not travel far these days, just the pharmacy, the farmer's market on Habersham, and the riverfront on Sundays when the weather forgives old knees. That morning began like every other Thursday. The air smelled of salt and magnolia. I locked the door of my bungalow and carried the same canvas tote I have used for years. I remember thinking about the tomatoes I would buy, how their red always reminded me of the paint I once used to teach shading to restless teenagers. I walked down the path to the street, already feeling proud of a day beginning in order. Then I saw the space. The spot where my silver Camry should have been was a clean rectangle of sunlight. The faint oil mark on the pavement was still there, proof that I had not imagined the car, proof that something had been taken. I turned in slow circles, as if the car might appear from behind a hedge. My chest tightened. I thought of the loan I had finished paying just last month, 4 years of careful budgeting, 4 years of saying no to trips, new clothes, and even a dental crown I probably needed. My first thought was towing. Maybe I had parked wrong. But the sign was clear resident parking only. I reached into my purse for my phone, my fingers trembling. The first number I called was my daughter's. Mom Isla's voice sounded calm, cheerful even. "Sweetheart," I said, trying to breathe. "My car is gone. I just walked outside and it's not here." There was a pause. Then she sighed, the way she used to when I reminded her to clean her room. "Mom, calm down. I gave it to Ethan's mother. She needs it more." I could not make the words fit together. "You what?" "She doesn't have reliable transportation," Isla said quickly. "Ethan's been so worried about her getting to her appointments." I pressed my hand against the porch rail, the wood rough under my palm. "Celeste doesn't even drive. Isla, she's learning again. It's temporary. We'll figure something out." She was speaking like someone who had borrowed a sweater, not taken the only car her mother owned. The blood in my ears roared so loud I could barely hear her next words, something about family, something about understanding. I ended the call without replying. For a long moment I stood there, watching the street, the neighbors' cars glittering under the morning sun. The world looked the same, but everything had shifted. My own daughter had given away the thing that kept me moving. The one symbol of freedom left after age took its share. I walked back inside, set my purse on the table, and stared at the empty key hook by the door. Then I reached for the phone again. My hand did not shake this time. I had never thought I would be 72 and calling the police on my own family. My fingers hesitated above the keypad longer than I want to admit. Calling the police felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. Still, I dialed. 911. "What's your emergency?" The woman's voice was calm, practiced. "My car is gone," I said. "A 2021 silver Camry. It was parked outside my home in Midtown Savannah this morning, and now it's gone." "All right, ma'am," she replied. "Let's take this one step at a time. Do you have the license plate number?" "Yes, I have everything." I found the folder where I kept the car papers. Title, registration, insurance, every document neatly labeled. My hands trembled so badly that the pages fluttered. Plate number XDV0713. It's registered to me. Liora Hanley. I finished paying off the loan last month. Do you know who might have taken the vehicle? That question sat heavy in my throat. I could almost hear my own heartbeat in the silence that followed. "Yes," I said finally. "My daughter gave it away without my permission. Can you clarify that, ma'am?" "She said she gave it to her mother-in-law. I didn't agree to anything. It's still my car." There was a pause, then a professional softness in her tone. "Understood. That qualifies as a theft if you did not authorize it. I'm assigning Officer Danner to your case. Please remain at your residence in case we need to send a patrol unit. All right, I whispered. When I hung up, the house seemed smaller, the air too still. I stood by the kitchen counter, the phone still in my hand, until it began ringing again. Isla's name flashed across the screen. I considered ignoring it, but old instincts are hard to break. I answered. Mom, Isla began sharply. Tell me you didn't actually call the police. I did. I said. My voice was steady, even to my own surprise. Why would you do that, she demanded. You're making this into a circus. It's family, not a crime. You took my car, I said quietly. You gave it to someone who doesn't even have a license. That's a crime. You're overreacting. It's temporary. Ethan's mother just needs help getting to her doctor for a few weeks. And how am I supposed to get to mine, I said. You didn't ask. You just decided. Her tone cracked, frustration bleeding through. I was trying to help. Mom, you always talk about being generous, about doing what's right. Well, this is right. No, I said. This is theft dressed up as kindness. Do you hear yourself? She snapped. You sound ridiculous. I closed my eyes, picturing her as she must have been while speaking, phone pressed to her ear, brows furrowed, righteous in her certainty. The same expression she used as a child when she believed rules applied only to others. I raised you better than this. I said, better than to take what isn't yours and call it compassion. I didn't steal it, she said through clenched teeth. You're just being stubborn. I'm being clear. She exhaled hard into the phone. You didn't have to make it legal. Mom, we could have handled this privately. You didn't have to make it theft. Isla, silence. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear faint traffic on her end. Maybe the hum of her car's air conditioning, my car's air conditioning. Finally, she said, low and shaking, You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said. But not as much as I'd regret saying nothing. I ended the call before she could answer. My thumb hovered over the screen, then slid the phone face down on the counter. The sound of the click felt final, like a door closing. A few minutes later, a text arrived from an unknown number confirming the case number and the name of the assigned officer, Detective Danner. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Fear sat in my chest, heavy and cold. But beneath it, something else began to take shape, something firmer, older than fear. I had not felt it in years. Defiance. The morning crawled by in strange silence. I kept glancing at the street through the blinds, half expecting a tow truck to appear and undo everything. When none came, I picked up the phone and called Ruth next door. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk as always. Liora, you sound pale through the line. What happened? My car's gone, I said. You didn't see a tow truck out here this morning, did you? Tow truck? No, dear. I've been pruning the roses since 7. No one touched a thing out there. Why did it get taken? I hesitated. It was borrowed. Without permission. By who? My daughter, I said quietly. She gave it to her mother-in-law. Ruth let out a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. Good Lord, that woman doesn't even drive. She failed her renewal test last year. Ethan told my niece about it. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. She doesn't drive. Not legally. No, Ruth said. She clipped a mailbox and gave up. What on earth does she want with your car? That, I murmured, is the question. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, phone still in my hand, scrolling without meaning to. I opened Facebook out of habit the same way you check a bruise just to see how bad it's gotten. The first thing on my feed stopped my breath. A photo. My Camry, unmistakable in the sunlight. parked in a new driveway with a caption written in looping cursive letters. Finally, mobile again. So grateful for family. Dozens of comments bloomed beneath it. You deserve it. Celeste. Family always comes through. Looks great on you. Each word felt like a splinter under my skin. The car looked different there. Its clean lines turned strange, out of place. I zoomed in on the photo until I could see my own reflection in the passenger side window. I remembered waxing that hood myself only last weekend. I remembered how the shine had pleased me because it meant I still had control over something. Now it was proof that I didn't. I turned off the phone and let it rest face down on the table. The silence returned, but this time it felt crowded with disbelief, anger, and the echo of my daughter's calm voice. Somewhere between the stillness and the ache, an old memory surfaced the day Isla learned to drive. We were in a church parking lot off Montgomery Street. She was 16. Knees knocking beneath a blue denim skirt. Her hands gripping the wheel as if the car were a living thing that might bite. Easy. I'd told her, "You're not forcing it. You're guiding it." She had glanced at me nervously, her hair half hiding her face. "What if I crash? Then we fix it." I'd said, "But you won't." I remembered how she had trusted me then, how she'd eased her foot on the gas. Eyes wide with wonder when the car rolled forward. That first small motion had felt like the world opening up for her. And now, years later, she had handed that same freedom to someone else as if it were a spare loaf of bread. The house felt smaller with that memory sitting in it. I stood and opened the drawer beside the sink where I kept my keys. There was only the house key left. The space where the spare car key had been was empty. For the first time that morning, I stopped trembling. The shock had burned itself out, leaving something harder behind. I picked up the phone again. This time, not to scroll, but to save the evidence. I took a screenshot of the post, the comments, the caption, and attached them to the police report number on my desk. It wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about what it meant when someone decided your independence was optional. I closed the laptop, straightened my shoulders, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "All right." Then I began to plan what came next. By late afternoon, the air had grown heavy, and the sound of tires on the street made me jump. A white patrol car pulled up in front of my house. A tall man stepped out, not young but steady-looking, the kind of presence that fills a doorway without trying. He introduced himself as Officer Danner. His voice carried that calm tone I'd heard earlier on the phone, the kind trained to steady panic. "Mrs. Hanley," he said, notebook in hand. "Mind if I come in and take a statement?" "Of course," I said, moving aside. "It's Miss..." Actually, he gave a small nod and followed me to the kitchen. I had already laid everything out: registration, insurance, loan documents, even the final payoff letter from the bank. They sat in a neat pile beside a folder marked Vehicle Records, something I'd kept since the day I bought the car. He scanned each page carefully. "You're organized," he said. "I used to teach art." I told him chaos and structure lived side by side. I learned to pick my favorite. That earned a small smile. "When did you last see the vehicle?" "Yesterday evening, around 6. I said. I parked it right out front, locked it, and left the spare key in this drawer for emergencies. I tapped the wooden drawer by the counter. This morning, it was gone. Any sign of forced entry? "No, I suspect my daughter used the spare." He paused, pen hovering over the notepad. "Your daughter took the car. She gave it away," I said, and my voice didn't shake this time. "To her husband's mother, without asking me, without permission." He nodded slowly. "Do you have proof of that?" I slid my phone toward him. On the screen was the screenshot I'd taken of Celeste's Facebook post. Finally, mobile again, so grateful for family. The photo of my car gleamed beneath it. Officer Danner let out a quiet breath through his nose. "That'll do." He took notes with short, neat strokes. Do you have any reason to believe your daughter intended to return it? She said it was temporary. I answered, but she didn't ask. She just decided I didn't need it anymore. He met my eyes. I see this kind of thing more than you'd think, family believing their closeness excuses consent. But the law doesn't bend that way. The vehicle is registered to you alone. Without written or verbal permission, it's theft. The word landed hard, like a gavel striking wood. I exhaled slowly. Then I suppose I'm pressing charges. He wrote something else, then turned the form toward me. You'll need to sign here. This authorizes us to recover the vehicle and, if necessary, file for criminal action. I picked up the pen, the yes. For a moment, I stared at the blank line, thinking of Isla at 16, that same shaky handwriting she used to sign her first driver's test. Then I signed my name with a hand that didn't tremble. Officer Danner gathered the pages and slipped them into a leather folder. You did the right thing, he said. We'll start by entering the vehicle into the national database. If it's spotted, patrol will pull it over. Thank you, officer. He nodded once, then left with a quiet click of the door. When the house went still again, the quiet felt different, not hollow, exactly, but rearranged. I sat at the table, staring at the faint ring of his coffee cup on the wood. The paperwork lay beside me, my signature dark and final across the bottom line. I reached for the drawer that had once held my spare key. It gaped open, empty. I closed it gently, then turned the lock I'd installed just last week, a small brass latch, something I'd bought without thinking much of it. The sound of the lock sliding into place was softer than I expected, almost polite, but in that moment, it felt like a promise I'd made to myself. The phone began ringing before sunrise. By mid-morning, it had become a rhythm ring, pause, voicemail, repeat. I tried ignoring it. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. The fourth time it rang, I answered. Liora. My sister-in-law's voice came through, too bright, too sharp. What on earth are you doing? Good morning to you too, Edra, I said. Don't get smart with me, she snapped. Isla called last night in tears. You called the police on your own daughter. Her husband's mortified. The whole family's talking. I didn't call on my daughter, I said evenly. I called on what she did. Semantics. Edra scoffed. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Family helps family. I swallowed hard. I've helped plenty. I raised that girl alone. I paid off every cent of that car myself. It wasn't hers to give. Still, she said, lowering her tone, you could have handled this privately. You've embarrassed everyone. Everyone but the truth, I said quietly, and hung up. The phone rang again before I set it down. I let it go to voicemail this time. Then another, and another. By afternoon, there were 8 missed calls, 4 voicemails, and 1 long text from my cousin in Jacksonville. Isla said you overreacted. Please don't let this ruin the family. Not one message asked if I was safe, or if I needed a ride, or how I was getting to the doctor tomorrow. The next morning, I found out the hard way. My knees ached before I even reached the bus stop on Abercorn Street. I hadn't waited for a bus in 20 years. Not since before Harold passed. The bench was metal. Cold even in the Savannah sun. I sat with my tote bag pressed to my lap, pretending I didn't notice the sideways glances from people half my age. When the bus arrived, the driver lowered the ramp and said, "You okay there?" "Ma'am, fine." I lied. Climbing the steps slower than I wanted to, the seats smelled faintly of dust and perfume. I gripped the rail and stared out the window as the city rolled past the same streets I'd driven every week in my Camry. At the pharmacy, the clerk recognized me. "Where's your car, Miss Liora?" "You always park right outside." I hesitated, then said, "Loaned it out for a bit." The lie tasted like vinegar. When I got home, there were more messages waiting too from Isla I couldn't bring myself to open, and one new number I didn't recognize. The text read, "You've made your daughter miserable." She was only trying to help someone in need. No name, but I knew the voice behind those words, Celeste's polite cruelty, disguised as reason. That night, I turned my phone face down on the counter and made tea instead. The house was quiet, except for the kettle's hum. For a moment, I thought about calling Isla back, just to hear her voice, but I didn't trust what might come out of mine. The next morning, I rode the bus again, doctor's appointment this time. The waiting room chairs were too low, the magazines too thin. When the nurse called my name, she smiled gently. "You made it in this heat." "Yes," I said, "on my own." She nodded, not knowing how much those words meant. When I stepped back outside, the bus was late, and I sat on the bench again. My legs heavy, my pride heavier. People walked past without a glance. Cars moved in smooth streams down the road, each one a reminder of what I'd lost. Not just convenience, but dignity. By the time I made it home, the phone had stopped ringing. Silence filled the rooms, thick and final. I thought maybe they'd all run out of words. But then the screen lit up one last time. A voicemail from Isla, her voice trembling. "Mom, you don't understand what you've done." I deleted it without listening to the rest. Then I placed the phone in the drawer beside the locked key and closed it, slow and deliberate. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was distance earned and chosen. It was 2 days before I heard anything. By then, the phone had gone silent except for the occasional telemarketer and the hum of unanswered texts sitting like stones in my inbox. When the knock came, I almost didn't move. Then a calm voice called through the door. "Mrs. Hanley, Officer Danner." I opened it to find him standing there again, hat tucked under one arm, expression steady. He had the kind of face that didn't rush to judgment, eyes that studied before they spoke. "Afternoon, Officer," I said. "You're faster than most of my relatives." He smiled faintly. "Thought I'd check in." "Do you mind if I come in for a moment?" I led him to the kitchen. The table was still covered in the same papers I'd laid out when he first came, neat stacks, each labeled. "I wanted to update you," he said. "Your vehicle was cited yesterday by one of our patrol units in Pooler, parked outside a medical clinic off Highway 95. The officer on duty ran the plate, but the driver wasn't around. By the time we got there, it was gone." I felt the air catch in my chest. "So they're still driving it." "It seems that way," he said. "But the good news is, it confirms your report's active and visible in the system. That means it's only a matter of time before we find it." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for letting me know." He glanced at the untouched cup of tea beside me. "You haven't been sleeping much, have you?" "Hard to, when every car that passes sounds like yours." I said, "I keep looking out the window like a fool." "That's not foolish." He said, "It's human. You did the right thing, Mrs. Hanley. You need to remember that." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. "Everyone else seems to disagree. Everyone else isn't sworn to the law." He replied gently, "What your daughter did, it's unfortunate, but it's still a crime. You didn't create the problem. You reported one." His words steadied me, though they didn't stop the ache that had grown behind my ribs since that morning. "You know," I said after a moment, "my husband used to say something similar. Right is rarely easy, but always right." Harold had a way of making hard choices sound like virtues. He sounds like a smart man. He was patient. 2. Isla was only 9 when he passed, but she remembers him as someone who never raised his voice. I suppose that's why she thinks silence is strength. It's not. Sometimes it's just surrender. Officer Danner nodded. "Silence can fool people. But I don't think that's your problem. I smiled faintly. No, I suppose not. He stood after a moment. We'll keep you updated. I'm assigning myself to the case until it's resolved. You don't have to do that, I said. I want to, he replied. Cases like this, they matter. Not just because of the car, because people deserve to know the law still works for them. Something in his tone eased the tightness in my chest. For the first time in days, I felt a small measure of calm, the kind that comes from being seen rather than managed. Thank you, officer. He gave a respectful nod and left. His footsteps fading down the walk. When the house was quiet again, I found myself at the table, pen in hand. The open notebook beside me was something I hadn't used since Harold died. Pages of lists and reminders. The handwriting uneven from age. I turned to a fresh page and wrote, Day 1. The car is gone. The world still turns. I reported it. I am not wrong. The words looked strange in ink, but grounding. I wrote another line, then another. Day 2. The officer said I did the right thing. It still hurts anyway. When I closed the notebook, I felt something settle, fragile peace. But peace all the same. Outside, the street was quiet. Somewhere, my car was still moving, carrying pieces of my life away with it. I watched the evening light shift across the window pane. The faint reflection of my face caught in it. Older than I remembered. Some losses, I realized, are slow thieves. And the hardest part isn't watching what's taken, it's wondering what they'll reach for next. The house had never felt so quiet. Even the ticking clock on the mantel seemed hesitant, as if afraid to break the stillness that had taken over since Officer Danner's visit. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, watching steam twist into the afternoon light. Across the kitchen, the small wooden hook where my car keys had always hung looked naked now, just an empty notch in the wall. I had never noticed how often my eyes wandered there until there was nothing left to see. I traced my fingers along the edge of the table and thought of Isla, not the woman who had handed my car to someone else, but the little girl who once believed I could fix anything. The memory came back with the smell of wet earth. She had been 9, the year a summer storm tore through our street. A branch had crashed onto the roof and the power was out for a full day. I'd been out there in the drizzle, trying to drag the debris away by myself, when Isla came running barefoot from the porch, her raincoat half-buttoned, hair plastered to her face. Mom. Let me help, she had said, her voice bright even through the thunder. I told her to stay inside. She shook her head, dug her hands under the branch beside mine, and said, You shouldn't do everything alone. We worked until our arms ached, laughing each time the branch slipped and splashed mud on our clothes. Later that night, we lit candles and made sandwiches by flashlight. She'd leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, When I grow up, I'll take care of you the same way. I had believed her. I still wanted to. The kettle clicked off behind me, snapping the memory away. I poured the tea, added a bit of honey, and caught myself staring at that empty hook again. The silence pressed down until it felt like something physical, sitting on my chest. I picked up my phone and opened the shopping app. The search bar blinked at me like a small invitation. I typed steering wheel lock and scrolled through the results. They all looked the same, chrome, heavy, serious. I chose one with thick red handles, strong enough to say, This belongs to someone who's learned her lesson, for when it returns. I murmured aloud as I clicked purchase. My voice sounded strange, too steady. When the confirmation email arrived, I closed the phone and looked around the kitchen. Everything was in its place. The mugs lined up, the receipts filed, the world pretending to be normal. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the glass slightly. I thought again of that little girl in the rain, stubborn and kind, her small hands gripping a fallen branch beside mine. I whispered into the empty room, not as a question, but as a truth I needed to hear. I still raised you right. Then I folded the tea napkin in half, placed it neatly on the counter, and let the quiet settle again. The call came just after noon, while I was folding laundry in the quiet. My phone buzzed on the counter, and for a moment I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name, Mrs. Hanley. It's Officer Danner. His voice was calm, measured, the way someone speaks when they know news is coming. We located your vehicle this morning. My hands froze on the towel. You found it? Yes, ma'am. It was pulled over near the Garden City exit. The driver was identified as Celeste Brooks, your daughter's mother-in-law. I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. Did she resist? She cooperated. He said, she's been taken into custody for unauthorized use of a vehicle. The car's being impounded until we finish processing it. I'll call when you can retrieve it. I breathed in, shallow and slow. Relief and dread mixed in my chest like oil and water. Thank you, I managed. You've been very kind through this. I'm just doing my job. Mrs. Hanley, he said gently. And you did yours. You did nothing wrong. After he hung up, I stared at the quiet phone. The air in the kitchen felt too still. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the strange weight of getting exactly what I'd asked for. The knock came barely an hour later. I opened the door, and Isla stood there, eyes red, hair pulled back in a rush. You had her arrested, she said before I could speak. I stepped aside, but she didn't enter. The police arrested her, I said, because she was driving what isn't hers. You could have stopped it, Isla said, her voice sharp and shaking. You could have called them, told them to let her go. She was behind the wheel of my car, I replied. What did you expect them to do? Wave as she passed. She's 71, Isla cried. She's fragile. You've humiliated her, humiliated all of us. She humiliated herself the moment she turned that key. For a second, Isla's mouth opened, then closed again. She blinked hard, her voice cracking. Do you know how this looks? The news is already sharing photos. Everyone's calling Ethan. I felt something twist inside me. I didn't ask for that, I said quietly. I just wanted my car back. Mom, her tone shifted. Softer now. You've always been fair. You don't have to destroy someone to make a point. I looked at her face, still streaked with tears, and saw pieces of the child I used to comfort after nightmares. And what about me? Isla, I asked, keeping my tone steady. Who destroyed my peace when I stepped outside and found my freedom gone? She didn't answer. Somewhere behind us, a car passed, its radio faint. The news anchor's voice carried just enough for me to catch the words, local woman arrested for theft of vehicle registered to retired teacher. I didn't need to see the image. I knew what it looked like. Celeste's hands cuffed, head bowed, the car gleaming beside her like a witness. Isla turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. I can't believe this, she whispered. I can, I said, because it's real, because choices have weight. She left without another word. The door closed softly behind her, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breath. I stood there for a long time, not proud, not broken, just still. Justice had arrived exactly as promised, carrying both relief and something colder that I couldn't name. I went to the window, looked at the empty street, and felt the quiet settle heavy again. Justice had a price, and now I was beginning to count it. Ruth came over the next morning without calling first. That was her way. The screen door creaked open, and she appeared holding a small basket covered with a towel. I made blueberry muffins, she said, setting them on the counter. Still warm if you don't overthink it. I managed a small smile. I'll try not to. She filled the kettle like she'd done it 100 times in my kitchen. Neither of us spoke until the water began to boil. The smell of the muffins filled the space. Soft and sweet, something familiar that didn't hurt. Ruth slid into the chair across from me and poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "You look tired, Liora." "I feel tired," I said. "The kind that doesn't go away with sleep." She nodded. "Word gets around. I heard about the arrest." "Of course you did," I said quietly. Half the town probably knows by now. Ruth broke a muffin in half and handed me a piece. "People will talk, but they won't stay interested for long. Something shinier will come along." "I'm not worried about gossip," I said. "It's the silence afterward that gets to me. The kind that stretches between calls that never come." She stirred her coffee slowly. "Isla still hasn't reached out. She came by once," I said. "We didn't end well. I can't decide if I miss her or if I miss who she used to be." Ruth's eyes softened. "Maybe both. Maybe that's what motherhood is, missing all the versions of them, even the ones that hurt us." I looked at her hands, strong and lined, the same way mine had started to look. "You always make it sound poetic." "I just feel hollow." She smiled faintly. "That's what being a widow does to you. We learn how to live with space." I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth sit in my chest. When Harold died, I thought losing him would be the hardest part of growing old. I was wrong. It's losing the respect of someone you raised. That's what breaks something in you. Ruth leaned back, folding her arms. "We raise them to stand tall," she said, "and sometimes they forget they're standing on our shoulders. The view gets better, and they start to think they climbed there themselves." Her words landed like a small truth I'd been avoiding. Maybe I should have been stricter. Maybe I made it too easy for her to believe I'd always forgive. Ruth shook her head. "You don't need to rewrite history. You need to protect what's left of your peace." "I thought doing the right thing would feel better," I said. "It never does right away," she replied. "Doing right is a long game. You didn't lose a daughter. Liora, you found your voice. That counts for something." I looked at her, unsure whether to thank her or cry. Finding it cost me more than I expected. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Everything worth keeping costs something. But you're still here. You're still standing." For a long while, we just sat there, sipping coffee while the clock ticked behind us. The kind of silence that used to ache now felt almost peaceful. Ruth stood to leave and packed the leftover muffins into a small container. "Eat these later," she said. "Don't let the world take both your car and your appetite." Her humor made me laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in weeks. When she left, the door closed softly, and I looked around the kitchen. The air felt lighter somehow. The ache was still there, but so was something else, dignity. Maybe, or the shape of it returning. I poured the last of the coffee into my mug and whispered to the empty room, "I'm still standing." The knock came early evening, polite but steady. The kind that doesn't belong to a stranger. I opened the door and found Ethan, my daughter's husband, standing on the porch. He held his cap in both hands, eyes lowered in that careful way men use when they plan to ask for something. "Mrs. Hanley," he began. "Thank you for seeing me. I won't take much of your time." I nodded and motioned for him to come in. He hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside, gaze sweeping over the kitchen like he was memorizing the setting of a crime. "Coffee?" I asked. "No, thank you," he said quickly, then cleared his throat. "I came to talk about my mother." I waited. She's not doing well with all this," he continued. "She's scared, embarrassed. The stress isn't good for her heart." "She should have thought of that before she took my car," I said. Ethan flinched a little, but kept his voice even. "She didn't mean any harm. She thought it was temporary, just until her new medication kicked in. She's old. A bit confused sometimes." I studied him carefully. "She had enough clarity to renew her license last year by mail." I checked. "She signed the form herself." His jaw tightened. That doesn't mean she's not struggling. Maybe, I said, but struggling doesn't excuse stealing. He set his cap on the table, both hands flattening the brim. Look, Mrs. Hanley, I know how this must feel. I'd be angry too. But the charges, can't we just make them go away? It's tearing the family apart. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. The family was already torn the moment my daughter decided her mother-in-law's needs outweighed mine. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, shaking his head. This isn't what Isla wanted. She's trying to fix it. She just doesn't know how. She could start by apologizing, I said. Not for the embarrassment, but for the choice. Ethan rubbed his hands together, eyes darting to the window. I think she's scared of losing you. I almost laughed at that, but it came out more like a sigh. Then she should have thought twice before helping someone take what was mine. Fear doesn't erase consequences. He looked up at me then, really looked, as if trying to find something soft to grab onto. You're not an unreasonable woman, he said carefully. You know how much this will cost her, how much it'll cost all of us. I know exactly what it costs. I replied, it costs what happens when people decide doing wrong is easier than admitting it. He went still, the tension in his shoulders rising like a tide. My mother isn't a criminal, he said finally. She's someone who took what didn't belong to her and drove it across county lines. I interrupted. That's not confusion. Ethan, that's intent. The words hung between us. He blinked, his throat working as he swallowed. I don't want this to get worse, he said softly. I'm asking you, please drop the report. I can't, I said, because if I do, what lesson will she learn? What lesson will Isla learn that I'm easy to forgive, easy to take from, easy to silence? He exhaled slowly, defeat settling into his posture. You're not who I expected, he murmured. I hear that a lot. I said. He reached for his cap, hesitated, then met my eyes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened. For what it's worth, I replied. So am I. Ethan gave a short nod and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. Looking back, you remind me of my grandmother, he said quietly. She never bent for anyone either. I managed a faint smile. Then she must have known that bending looks a lot like breaking. He nodded once more and left. The sound of his car starting outside was soft, almost apologetic. When the house was still again, I locked the door and stood for a long moment in the quiet. The evening light stretched across the floor, warm and steady, as if nothing had changed, but something had. The line between forgiveness and surrender had drawn itself clear, and I knew which side I'd chosen. The envelope came 2 days later, thick and official, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even open it. It was stamped with the city seal and my name written in neat black ink, Ms. Liora Hanley. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where all of this had begun, and tore it open carefully. Inside were 2 papers. The first bore the court date, State of Georgia versus Celeste Brooks, and the second was a letter from her attorney, full of legal phrasing that tried too hard to sound gentle. My client wishes to express deep regret for the misunderstanding that led to this unfortunate situation. She values family, respects your property, and sincerely apologizes for any distress caused. I read it twice. The word misunderstanding caught in my throat like a stone. I folded the letter back into its envelope, pressing the edge flat with my palm. When the phone rang later that afternoon, I already knew who it would be. Mrs. Busham Hanley, Officer Danner said. I wanted to go over a few updates regarding your case. Of course, I tried to sound calm, but my voice came out thinner than I wanted. The district attorney's office is considering a plea deal, he continued. Celeste's attorney proposed that she plead guilty to unauthorized use of a vehicle, not theft. That would mean probation and restitution for the impound fees No jail time. So she admits she took it, I said. She admits she used it without permission, he corrected gently. It's a legal compromise. I wanted to hear your thoughts before they move forward. I leaned back, staring at the pale light filtering through the curtains. They sent me a letter, I said, an apology written by her lawyer, not by her. He was quiet for a moment. That's typical, he said. Attorneys like to control the language. Less risk for their clients. I don't care about risk. I said, I care about sincerity. Danner's tone softened. You have every right to ask for that. I want her to read it herself, I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. In court, out loud, no paper, no lawyer, just her voice saying what she did and that it was wrong. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then he said, That's not an unreasonable request. I can relay that to the prosecutor. Do you think they'll agree? I think, he said. If she wants this over quietly, she will. And if she doesn't, the judge will make her say it anyway. A small, grim satisfaction settled in me. Not vengeance. Exactly. But balance. Good, I said. Then that's my condition. Danner hesitated before adding, You know, not everyone would hold their ground this far. Most people cave under family pressure. I've already lived through worse storms, I told him. I can stand this one too. He gave a quiet laugh. You remind me of my grandmother. She once made a man return her lawnmower in front of the whole neighborhood. That sounds like a woman who understood ownership. I said, she did, he replied. I'll let the court know your decision. You'll get a confirmation next week. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the letter again. The words blurred a little under the kitchen light. Misunderstanding, regret, distress. None of them meant sorry. I took out my notebook and flipped to the page where I had written my daily notes. Beneath yesterday's line, Day 8. Justice doesn't soothe, it steadies. I added a new one. Day 9. A real apology has to sound like truth, not damage control. When I closed the notebook, the air felt lighter, though my chest still carried that ache that comes after standing too straight for too long. Outside, the evening deepened over the street. I looked toward the empty driveway and thought about the moment that letter would be spoken aloud, her voice breaking the silence. Mine holding steady beside it. Justice wasn't warmth, but it was clarity, and for now, that was enough. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and old varnish. The kind of scent that clings to rooms where people have told too many truths and too many lies. I sat in the second row, hands folded around a worn handkerchief that once belonged to Harold, across the aisle. Isla sat beside her husband. Pale and rigid, she didn't look at me. I didn't look away. When the bailiff called the case State of Georgia versus Celeste Brooks, everyone rose. Celeste entered slowly, flanked by her attorney, her hair pinned up in the careful way of someone trying to look composed. For a moment, I saw the same polite woman who had once brought lemon bars to Isla's wedding shower. Then she turned, and our eyes met. Whatever kindness had existed between us had vanished, replaced by something quieter, but sharper understanding. The judge adjusted his glasses and spoke evenly. Mrs. Brooks, you've been charged with unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. How do you plead? Celeste's voice barely rose above a whisper. Guilty, Your Honor. Her attorney stood. Your Honor, my client has prepared a statement. As agreed upon in the plea arrangement, the judge nodded. Proceed. Celeste took a small paper from her purse and unfolded it. Her fingers trembled. For a heartbeat, she glanced toward me, then began, I want to apologize, she said, her voice thin but steady. I took Ms. Hanley's car without asking. I told myself it was only for a short time, that I needed to help my son and daughter-in-law. But the truth is, I wanted to feel useful again. I wanted to believe I could still drive myself somewhere, still matter to someone. Her hands tightened on the paper. That doesn't excuse what I did. It was wrong. I disrespected Ms. Hanley's trust, and I disrespected my own integrity. I am sorry. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratch of the clerk's pen. I heard Isla's breath catch across the aisle. Celeste folded the paper carefully, placed it back in her purse, and sat down. The judge leaned forward. Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. The court accepts your plea and your statement. Given your cooperation and lack of prior record, you are sentenced to 1 year of probation and ordered to pay restitution for the impound and legal fees, totaling $840. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Celeste said. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The sound echoed through the room, a small thunderclap that seemed to shake the air out of everyone's lungs. The bailiff announced the adjournment. Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled. People stood because they didn't know what else to do. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the bench. Isla turned her head for the first time, her eyes swollen and uncertain. Mom, she whispered, barely audible. I waited, but she said nothing more. Ethan touched her arm, and she looked away again. Celeste approached me carefully, her attorney lingering a few steps behind. Miss Hanley, she said, voice quivering. I know words don't change much, but I meant what I said in there. I nodded. So did I. She blinked, then gave a small, sad smile. You're a strong woman. Isla's lucky to have you. Then she should remember it, I said softly. Celeste's eyes shone for a moment before she turned and followed her lawyer toward the exit. I stood still, watching until the door closed behind her. When I finally stepped outside, the afternoon air hit me like cool glass. The courthouse steps gleamed under the sun, and somewhere nearby a car alarm chirped once, then stopped. The sound made my heart jolt, then slow. I walked to the bus stop across the street, the same one I'd used on those first lonely days after the theft. People passed by in their own worlds, phones to ears, hands in pockets. No one looked twice at the older woman standing there, clutching a folded handkerchief and breathing as if every exhale carried a piece of the past away. Across the street, Isla and Ethan emerged from the courthouse. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to cross over, but she didn't. She got into her husband's car instead. I watched the taillights fade into the traffic, then turned toward the horizon. The sky was bright, too bright, but I kept walking until I reached the corner. When I looked back once more, the courthouse stood quiet behind me, solid, cold, but fair. Justice had been done. I pressed the handkerchief to my palm, feeling its thin fabric soften with warmth. Somewhere inside that silence, I realized justice and love had never been built to live easily together. Only one of them ever left a person standing tall. Winter passed quietly. Though the calendar did not need to tell me how long it had been since the hearing, the air itself seemed to count for me colder, stiller, heavier. I kept track of time by the mail that arrived: utility bills, church newsletters. Nothing with her name. Isla didn't call. Not once. I still kept her number saved. Just where it had always been under my girl. I could have deleted it, but that felt too final. Too much like burying someone still breathing. So it stayed there, glowing faintly every time I scrolled past it. I never opened our last thread of messages. I didn't need to reread what silence already said. On Sundays, I still went to church. It was the one thing I refused to surrender. The congregation knew enough to fill in the blanks. News travels faster than forgiveness in a small town. After service one morning, as I stood by the coffee urn, 2 women from the quilting circle passed behind me. Voices lowered, but not enough. It's such a shame, one murmured. Family shouldn't fight in public, the poor daughter. The other replied, I'd have let it go. Blood is blood. I stirred my coffee slowly, pretending not to hear. When they looked over, I smiled just enough to make them turn away. I wasn't angry, just tired. There was a time when gossip stung, but now it sounded like background noise, a hum I'd learned to live above. Ruth caught up with me in the parking lot afterward. She didn't ask what they'd said. She just slipped her arm through mine and walked me to my car. People love a story, she said. They forget stories belong to real people. Let them talk, I said. They need something to fill the quiet. That afternoon, I came home and found myself standing in front of the garage door. It had been Harold's domain once his tools lined in careful rows, the air still faintly carrying the smell of oil and cedar. The door lock had rusted years ago, but I'd never bothered to replace it. No one had reason to open it except me. Until now. I drove to the hardware store and bought a new lock. The clerk, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, smiled and said, "This one's solid steel. No one's getting past it without permission." "Good," I said, taking the small box from his hand. "That's the idea." Back home, I set the box on the workbench and stared at the door for a long moment before beginning. The screws resisted at first, as if the old lock wanted to stay, but eventually it gave. My fingers shook more than they used to, but I kept at it, one screw at a time, until the latch clicked into place. The sound was sharp, final, but not cruel. When it was done, I leaned against the workbench, breathing in the quiet. The late light slanted through the small window, catching on the edge of Harold's old hammer. I could almost hear him saying what he always said after finishing a job. "There, that's better." I whispered it too, half to him, half to myself. Inside the house. My phone buzzed once, a message from Ruth reminding me about the Tuesday book club. I picked it up, and my thumb hovered, as it always did, over the name above hers. My girl. For the first time, I didn't open it. I set the phone down gently on the counter, face down, and turned off the ringer. The silence that followed didn't feel empty, Cephals. It felt earned. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched dusk gather at the edges of the yard. The world went on quietly, traffic in the distance. A dog barking somewhere. The ordinary rhythm of people whose lives hadn't cracked open. In the faint reflection of the glass, I saw my own face, older, yes, but not broken, just steadier. Behind me, the new lock gleamed faintly in the kitchen light. A small, unremarkable thing, but mine, and for the first time in months. That was enough. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the windows once, then went still again. I let it. It was a Saturday morning in early spring, when I heard the clatter of metal against concrete outside. The sound startled me at first, sharp, then followed by a small voice muttering, "Oh, come on." Through the window, I saw Ruth's grandson crouched beside his bicycle at the edge of her driveway, his hair stuck up in wild tufts, his hands already dark with grease. The chain had slipped, dangling loose like a broken promise. I stepped outside before I had time to think about it. "That bike giving you trouble?" I asked. He looked up quickly, eyes wide. "Oh, hi, Miss Hanley. Yeah, it won't go back on. Grandma said not to mess with it, but I thought maybe I could fix it before she noticed." I smiled. "You sound like my daughter at your age." She thought rules were just slow suggestions. He grinned shyly, then looked down again. "I didn't mean to break it." "You didn't," I said, kneeling beside him. My knees complained, but I ignored them. "You just need to know where to start. May I?" He handed me the bike without hesitation. His trust surprised me, simple and unearned. I took a rag from the basket attached to the handlebars and wiped the chain clean. "See this?" I said, pointing. "It's not broken, it just slipped off its gear. Happens when you pedal too hard uphill." He leaned closer, watching intently. "So how do you fix it?" "You guide it back. Not force guidance, I said, pressing the chain back into place and spinning the wheel. The gears caught with a satisfying click. There, try it. He climbed on, pushed off once, then twice. The wheels spun cleanly, the chain steady. He laughed out loud, a quick burst of joy that lifted something in the air between us. Thank you, he called as he pedaled in a small circle. You fixed it? Just helped it remember how to move, I said. Ruth appeared at her front door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I told him not to mess with that thing, she said, half amused, half exasperated. He's learning. I replied. Besides, he did most of the work himself. Ruth's expression softened. You always were good at giving credit where it's due. The boy rode to the end of the street and back, proud as a parade. When he stopped, he looked at me again. Can I show you a trick? Only if it doesn't end with a scraped knee, I said. He laughed, lifted his feet off the pedals for half a second, then caught them again, wobbly but triumphant. See, not even close. Ruth shook her head, smiling. He'll be the end of me. He'll be the making of you, I said quietly. We stood there together, watching him loop around the mailbox. The morning sun caught the silver on his bike spokes, flashing like little bursts of light. It felt good to see motion, to witness something that worked again after falling apart. Ruth handed me her dish towel, though I hadn't asked for it. You've still got the teacher's touch, she said. Doesn't fade, does it? Maybe not, I said. I guess some things stay, even when you think you've let them go. She looked at me sideways. Talking about bikes or daughters, maybe both. Ruth didn't press further. She never did. You should come by later, she said instead. He's making lemonade, real lemons, not the powder. I said. When they went inside, I stayed in the driveway a little longer, wiping the last smudge of grease from my fingers. The sound of the boys' laughter still lingered in the air, light and easy. It struck me then how something as small as fixing a chain could shift the weight inside a person. I hadn't realized how heavy my own hands had felt until they were doing something gentle again. I walked back toward my house, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The new lock on my garage glinted in the sun, a quiet reminder of safety. But in that moment, it didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like something earned, like a door that could open when I chose. Inside, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window across the yard. The boy's bike leaned against Ruth's fence, upright and waiting. For once, the sight of wheels didn't remind me of loss. It reminded me of movement, kindness. I thought, didn't have to come from blood. It could live right next door. It came on a Wednesday morning, tucked among utility bills and an insurance notice, a pale blue envelope with my name written in Isla's looping handwriting. I hadn't seen that handwriting in nearly a year, but my body remembered it before my mind did. My hands went still on the stack of mail. I took the letter inside, sat at the kitchen table, and just stared at it for a while. The paper looked soft from being handled too long, like it had been opened and closed many times before being sent. The postmark was from 2 towns over. I made tea, more for something to hold than to drink, then opened the envelope. The scent of ink and faint perfume, the kind she used to borrow from me when she was 17, drifted up. Inside, 1 sheet of lined paper, folded twice. I unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting filled the page. Mom, I've tried to write this a dozen times. Every version sounded wrong, so I'm just going to say what's true. I took the spare key from your kitchen drawer. I told myself I was helping, that Celeste needed it more, that it wasn't stealing if it came from love, but it was stealing, and I knew it even then. When I saw her arrested, I realized what I'd done not to her, but to you. I broke something I can't buy back. You taught me that right and easy are rarely the same, And I failed you twice once by taking what wasn't mine, and again by letting you stand alone when I should have stood beside you. I still don't know how to fix it. Maybe I can't. But I need you to know I see it clearly now. You were right to call the police. You were right to draw a line. I was wrong to think love meant never saying no. I miss you every day. Love, Isla. The words blurred halfway through. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed on the paper and spread the ink in the corner of her name. I read the letter again, slower this time, letting each sentence land where it needed to. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. She hadn't begged. She'd just told the truth. The one thing I had waited for since that morning. I found the empty space where my car had been. When I finished, I folded the page neatly and held it between my palms. My heart hurt. But it was a cleaner kind of pain, the sort that comes when air finally reaches a wound. The kettle clicked again on the stove. Still hot from before, I poured another cup without tasting it. The quiet in the house no longer felt heavy. It just was. I looked toward the garage through the back window, where my car sat safe behind the new lock. On the small shelf near the door was the red steering wheel lock I'd bought months ago, its metal gleaming under the afternoon light. I walked over, opened the shelf, and set Isla's letter beside it. The two looked strange together, one meant for protection, the other for admission. The past and the present, side by side. For a long moment, I just stood there. I could almost hear her voice again. Not as it was last year, angry, defensive, but the way it used to sound when she'd call from college to say she'd made soup for the first time, or when she'd phone late at night just to tell me she missed home. I closed the shelf gently and turned the key in its lock. The sound was soft, final, but not cold. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off and the car keys resting on the table beside me. The air smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low, steady, harmless. I traced the edge of the key with my thumb, thinking about how trust, once broken, doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. I didn't know yet if I could forgive. But for the first time in a year, I wanted to try. The sun was low when I started the engine. The Camry purred to life like it had just been waiting for me to return, patient and uncomplaining. The sound was steady, familiar, the kind of hum that feels like forgiveness without words. I rolled down the window. The air off the Savannah River carried that mix of salt and jasmine I'd known my whole life. Evening light flickered across the dashboard, soft and gold. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel watched or judged. Just present. The road curved along the water, smooth and open. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on my lap. My wrists had grown thinner since the last time I'd taken this route, but they still felt sure. The car moved like something alive beneath me, solid, loyal, mine. I passed the old boatyard where Harold used to bring me on Sunday drives. We'd sit and watch the ships, guessing where they were bound. Anywhere worth going, he used to say. Starts with knowing how to come home. I smiled a little. The memory quiet and kind, like a companion riding along. The city drifted by brick storefronts, fading murals, the distant toll of church bells, life continuing. Unbothered by the wreckage it leaves behind, I didn't resent it anymore. As I turned down a smaller road, I saw the house where Celeste used to live. The shutters were closed now. A for sale sign staked crookedly in the yard. The windows were dark, reflecting the evening sky instead of faces. Whatever had happened inside those walls was finished. I slowed the car but didn't stop. Some things don't need revisiting. The ache that once gripped me when I thought of her was gone. Replaced by something quieter understanding, maybe. She had wanted to feel useful. And I had wanted to feel respected. We had both chased dignity in different directions. And both learned what it costs when you steal it from someone else. The road widened again, and the light ahead stretched long and orange across the river. I loosened my grip on the wheel and let the car glide, the sound of the tires blending with the hum of cicadas outside. My thoughts drifted to Isla's letter, the one I'd folded beside the steering wheel lock. I hadn't written her back. Not yet. Forgiveness, I'd realized, wasn't something that came through mail or words. It was something you lived, mile by mile, until the anger thinned enough for compassion to breathe again. I touched the edge of the keychain hanging from the ignition. It was a small silver charm, worn smooth from years of use, a seashell Harold had given me on our 20th anniversary. For when you forget the sound of the ocean, he'd said. I'd forgotten many things since then, but not that. The road ahead curved toward home. The sun slipped lower, staining the water a deep copper. I felt calm, unhurried. There was nothing left to fight for, and nothing left to prove. The car hummed, the river shimmered, and somewhere inside me, something settled. At the next red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines on my face were sharper now, but they didn't look like regret. They looked like survival. When the light turned green, I eased forward, letting the motion carry me. The bridge rose ahead, arching over the river like a promise kept. I pressed my foot lightly on the gas, and the car answered, smooth as breath. I thought about the years behind me, the theft, the courtroom, the silence, the letter, and how they'd all led to this one quiet drive. Freedom. I realized Wasi wasn't about having what was taken, it was about keeping what couldn't be stolen. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned lavender, then gold, then nothing but soft blue dusk. I smiled to myself, the wheel warm beneath my palms. Respect shouldn't depend on blood. I said softly into the empty car, it should depend on decency. The wind carried the words out the window and into the fading light. I turned onto my street, the house waiting modest. Safe, mine. I parked carefully in the driveway, shifted into neutral, and let the engine idle for one last moment. Sometimes, keeping your keys means keeping yourself.